This is a podcast where experts in movement and life tackle current concepts in health and wellness and use science and evidence as the foundation of how we discuss each topic. This is not medical advice, but a sedentary lifestyle is much more harmful, so we should move. The Motif Experience, where movement and life come together. I'm your host, Dr. Tyler Cuddy-Ford.
Anyway.
Hey, we have some theories. So maybe you can help us.
What is this?
Today we have welcome. Today we have Dr. Kim Eppen, a pally of mine. We met her in 1996. I still remember to this day when we first met. It was in the hospital, and I was getting a tour, and you were there.
What was I doing?
I have no idea.
I was working.
You were working. Yes, you were working. No, I know.
You have no idea.
No, but I meant you were.
Wasn't
working.
it obvious?
Yeah. No. So, and that was a long time ago. Was that for the interview, I think, maybe.
Oh, yes.
It was the interview, yeah. So it was, I don't know, maybe in May or something. A long time ago. I
remember.
So I met Kim then a long time ago. So we've been, I guess, kept in touch ever since.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the quandary we have is when we travel to Africa or other developing countries. Those that have gluten intolerance here don't have it overseas.
Is that because there's no gluten in the food over there?
No, there's gluten because it's wheat and it's bread and it's fresh baked, and so I don't know. What's your best guess?
Wow. Well, maybe it's not the gluten in the products here in the U.S. that's causing gluten intolerance. Maybe
I'm with you. Keep going. So for the audience listening, we have never talked about this, Kim and I. So.
And I've never even, I wouldn't even know that.
Yeah, I mean, it happens regularly. Every time we go, either to Ghana or Uganda, there's always a student, not always, there's an occasional student that's gluten intolerant. And so a lot of times they'll bring food, or maybe they'll run out, and then we'll have, pick something, bread or pasta, something, because they try to make an American meal for us just to be nice. And then a lot of times in the mornings there's some bread with coffee, or just bread with maybe an egg or something. And I think just nearly all the students that have risked trying it, because not all do that, they don't have any consequences like they do here. So keep going with your thought, because I'm wondering if we're going to go to the same place.
Well, I would just imagine that. I mean, maybe it's the way that wheat is raised, grown in the U.S. compared to other places. Yeah. Could be pesticides, chemicals.
All right, so here we go. Farm girl, Iowa. So she grew up there forever, and there's 12 million acres of corn, by the way, in Iowa, and 10 million acres of soybeans. So she knows a bit about farming, kind of, but
but not really.
But not really. So she's here today to talk about health and wellness, and so yay.
So gluten intolerance is.
It's kind of linked, right?
It is.
I think,
it is.
The foods we eat, the activities that we do,
Sure.
Those things that are ingrained in us, and those kinds of things. This is just a podcast today about health and wellness and activity for chronic conditions. Chronic health conditions is Kim's expertise, and so we're just gonna get started. So,
I would say it. Thank you. I mean, if I had to guess, I would say it perhaps has to do something with how the wheat is raised, is produced. Yeah. And it'd be interesting to see. Or in the factories, what is done. Are there chemicals
super interested in that.
Yeah.
Because that's just, it's anecdotal when we go.
Yeah.
Because it's just, it's one at a time.
Right.
But I wonder too if it's just the stuff that we do in the farming, the modified, they're hybridized, right? To get the best yields, and I get all that, and and the pesticides and herbicides they use. I wonder if that contributes to some of that.
Potentially, however, if the people who are gluten intolerant in the U.S. and then go overseas and eat gluten and they don't have the same reaction. Yeah. If they're eating organic, non-GMO, gluten-free wheat products in the U.S., then I guess that kind of sort of negates
that's a good
potential impact that it. I don't want to. Yeah. we don't want to like say herbicides and pesticides are all
no, we don't. Absolutely.
bad, but I don't want to say that that's the culprit because perhaps there could be some other factor.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
That's really interesting. I thought the same thing as we come back from the trip or we go and notice these kinds of things. I wondered if it was something like that. Okay.
Good question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, why are you here?
Well, I was invited to come participate.
Oh, you were? Okay.
I was,
and
yes.
So,
all the way from Iowa.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
My background?
Yeah.
Well...
Professional cyclist, right? She's...
No.
Pretty close. She's like won every event.
No, I haven't.
That's not true.
Out.
Okay, nearly every event. So she's here with her.
I know how to pedal a bike. I'll just put it that way.
Like better than anyone else. All right. So I gotta say, so she invites me to go for a bike ride when I'm there.
This is back in Iowa. We were in the PhD program together. So
we were in a PhD
Tyler said that he was an avid cyclist. So I was like, really?
I cycled a lot.
I'm like, sweet. Let's go.
And we went. And so I think on the way there it was okay, right? And then of course. I think I have my road bike and you have your mountain bike.
I think that was true.
I think that's something like that. So I'm
because I didn't have a road bike at the time.
I'm like, and I didn't have a mountain bike. So we went somewhere.
Sugar Bottom.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yep.
And
a known loop.
There's some
in the area?
loops around there, and then on the way back, she decides she looks back and says, "I don't know. I remember it may be different." Keep up if you can, right? Something like that.
I don't think I said that.
No,
you
she didn't.
Thought I said that.
I don't know. I'm just teasing.
That is not my personality.
It is not.
I was just putting a little tester.
But she is competitive. I know. So anyway, so I'm going to swear, she kicked my ass. I mean, not really badly, but bad enough. So that was really great.
No, well. And so the friendship grew.
It did, yeah. Even though she beat me, the friendship.
It wasn't a race.
And then get this, right? So I'm going to pick on her because I love her, actually. So and her husband Brian. So we took a course together, and then just did some things occasionally. And so she's teaching aerobics as well as doing PT stuff and other lectures, and so
I was working full time. Plus, I had a couple other jobs while I was getting my PhD.
Right. So
Tyler's full time job was getting his PhD, and since I was from Iowa, I was I was involved in a lot of different things. So I was trying to introduce him kind of to the community and, things like I worked at a gym at the time and I taught a variety of exercise classes. So I was just trying to be friendly and invite him to some exercise classes.
So it was an abs workout class. I remember it to this day. And she doesn't believe she did this, but I'm pretty sure this happened. And so we're doing abs. And for one, it's an hour abs class. And so it's like, what? So that's part one. I just like am 10 minutes in and I'm like, this is not going well. And then if you saw the camera, and I'm doing the abs and she's doing the workout, and she's doing her nails.
I'm not doing them. I might have been looking at it because
it was so easy for her to do these crunches and stuff, and I'm like dead. So again, she whipped me. So
still sore.
I know, I'm still sore. 25 years later.
Sore ego, not sore abs.
No, I don't have ego, so that's the good thing.
No.
So
it was all in good fun.
It was really great.
I was trying to promote health and wellness even back then. So
100% true. Yes. So sorry.
It's good, and you remember.
I do remember.
That's good.
I do remember.
Yes, I planted the seed.
You did. So So sorry to interrupt, folks.
No.
But continue with your background and why are you interested in health and wellness? Yeah.
Well, it's part of my DNA. You know, I was born a very active individual and raised in a family that exercise was just something that you did. We ate pretty healthy on the budget that we had. We didn't have much, but we tried. My parents just kind of instilled that in us, and I grew up as a competitive athlete. I swam, and any swimmers out there know that it's a very regimented schedule. You're very dedicated, and it goes year round. So that's kind of was ingrained in me, and it just kind of stuck with me. So I'm kind of like a dog. I have to exercise every day. I'm one of those high-strung dogs, and if I don't, it's no good. You feel like you're in a cage, and you need to just get out. So, So to me, health kind of looks like the ability to have my physical ability. That's really important to me to live an active lifestyle. So trying to eat healthy and be active is just part of who I am, and so why am I interested in that? And, just sharing it with other people, because it's like, you want other people to have that joy too, and see what that feels like, and be able to, train for life and be ready for anything. So
it seems to me like you switched a little bit from, kind of this performance athlete, and then recreational, and then she is amazing cyclist, by the way. So, and then, but your full-time gig at the hospital was these chronic health conditions.
Right.
So, did you kind of do a mind shift, and how did that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So I work as a physical therapist, and then I'm also adjunct faculty at the University of Iowa, and then I've been blessed enough to be invited to, participate as a faculty adjunct, lecturer, and here at George Fox University. And so back to your kind of comment, so, growing up as a competitive athlete, and then I also worked at health clubs. I started teaching exercise classes when I was probably 17 or 18. I coached swimming. So my background is really structured athletics and physical activity for people who want to be there.
Yeah.
They make the effort to be there, and they share the same, I think, value in health and the desire to want to be healthy. And being in the clinical setting, working primarily with people who have chronic disease, more specifically, my area of focus is with people who have pulmonary disease. So they have difficulty breathing. I started to learn over time that not everybody has the same value system. I started to appreciate my health and my abilities even more just by seeing what other people maybe can't do and what their limitations were. So that made me value health and wellness in a different way, in a different light, because when you have your health and your abilities, you might take it for granted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Until you really realize maybe you have an injury, or someone close to you is injured, and their mobility or their health is taken away from them. But chronically over time, working with people who have true limitations, like their whole system is governed by their lungs, really impacted me in a way that forced me to kind of change my kind of coaching strategy, and assuming that everybody, you just go ahead and exercise. Why don't you do this? Don't you value your health? And kind of go with that kind of coaching mentality, to trying to start understanding, okay, why are people where they're at? And a lot of the conditions that I was seeing were a result of, behavior trends throughout life. And most of these people that I worked with were chronic non-exercisers. They may have been somewhat physically active out of necessity throughout their life, but the whole idea of exercise to them was kind of sort of foreign. Yeah. And so trying to figure out how to connect with patients and to come up with ways to help them increase their physical activity that was meaningful to them, was really important. And it just kind of, I guess.
Oh, that's right.
Mine?
That might be your phone.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, that's easy to cut out.
Okay. But really learning to meet people where they're at, and
So what's a practical way to do that? As we, a lot of the listeners are in a clinic, and they're pretty good at kind of this biopsychosocial model anymore, and behavior, and So what's some ways? And I don't know that we see people like you do, and so for me. Similar to you, and being competitive and liking athletics, and taking the gig at Nike, but then realizing there's people really that have health conditions that are dying, they're dying because of their decisions, diseases that are preventable.
Right.
And so instead of working on someone's shoe that was some micro millimeter thing having to do with them, or increase their performance, while they're already performing at the highest level. For me, it was the same. It was understanding the community as a whole is very unhealthy, and wanting to do something about that. But back to the question, how do you do that as a clinician, understanding that you've got a new patient, let's say, and it is about behavior.
Yeah. So if I could just back up, one thing I didn't say before is a major changing point and life-altering point for me was going through a chronic disease health coach training course, a structured training course that opened up my eyes to a lot of things. One, that not everybody values health the same way that I do.
Sure.
And so that was one of the most valuable lessons I learned, to recognize that when you work with patients who have chronic disease, don't assume they have the same value system that you do. Yeah. And that goes across the board for anybody, even in life, even outside of health. But when you're in healthcare, most of the people who go into healthcare, because they do it because they value health and they want to help people, get healthier, whether it's overcoming an injury or a chronic disease or whatever that is. But we can't assume that. And so especially with patients, so in that health coach training, I learned a lot of strategies about how to better understand people and different people's personalities and navigate conversations in a way that help you connect with people. And when you work with people who have chronic disease, it really does come down to human connection and behavior change, because chronic conditions usually are the result of chronic behaviors over time. It's not like you just wake up one day and then all of a sudden you have diabetes, obstructive sleep apnea, cancer, and all these things. It's like, well, how did these things come about? It was probably a culmination of behaviors over time that led to these things. And I recently read an article that said that less than 2% of disease is really related to our genetics.
Yeah.
Which makes you realize that the bulk of the diseases we're seeing are about, epigenetics, things that we can control in our environment, social culture, all these different things. And so with that being said, kind of circling back then, so that kind of life-changing course that I took really changed the trajectory of my career and my heart when it comes to working with people and how to meet people where they're at. And I say that by, it takes time, it takes patience, it takes learning how to, I call it a dance. Your conversations are like dancing with your patients and figuring out, who's leading and who's following. It's a give and take, learning to listen with intent to understand and creating that connection. And once you build that trust and connection with your patients, then it comes down to building self-efficacy, establishing their value system, what's important to them, what about their health is important to them, is it important to them, do they have confidence in their ability to make changes and things of that nature. So
I think we've all seen at least some documentaries that some people aren't interested.
Exactly.
And at all in changing behavior or, I mean, there was one recently, and the moderator, or if you will, was, pleased that he lost 60 pounds and, wanted to meet the community and, tell people about, his good news. And he went to all these restaurants where people have, eating fast foods and buffets, and it was clear that people didn't want to change.
Right.
Had really no desire to get healthy.
Right. So when we say healthy, though, health can look different for different people. And I think a lot of times that word implies, especially for those of us maybe who understand what it takes to maybe be a little healthier. Exactly. Nutrition and weight, I think, are sometimes the things we look at in exercise.
Yeah.
But when we really think about health and overall wellness and well-being, stress plays into the equation as well. Sleep plays into the equation. And even though maybe somebody doesn't want to make changes in their diet or their nutrition, they're like, okay, well, I'm just going to keep eating it. I don't want to say any fast food, whatever.
You can say it.
I'm going to keep eating this way because this is where I feel most comfortable.
Yeah.
But okay, so hypothetically, if you're going to change something else, like let's look at health maybe holistically.
Yeah.
So like that may be a way to work with a patient or a person like that. And are there other aspects that maybe you would be willing to make some changes in to help you feel better?
Yeah. So pick something that's important to them.
Exactly. And you have to figure out what their value system is, or what would it take for, what would have to happen? Like, and I love this word, and I use this all the time when I'm teaching students, is hypothetically. By saying, well, hypothetically, if you were to make a change, I'm not saying you have to. You don't have to stop. But hypothetically,
I have a friend.
Right.
Yeah.
But by saying hypothetically, it invites the person just to say, okay, well, into the possibility of what might that look like for me? What might I feel comfortable enough, at least thinking about? And at least if that seed gets planted, it's kind of like it takes them to that step of at least pre-contemplation or contemplation in maybe working towards a change in behavior.
All right, so I'm going to throw something at you. Something that might be contrary to what you said.
Sure.
Because there's poster boys and poster girls for every single, diet program around, right? And at some level, someone said, all right, I'm done being this kind of healthy or this kind of unhealthy, and I want to change. And so every diet seems to work. On the flip side,
short term though, usually.
No diet works.
Okay.
Right, because not that everyone reverts, but it doesn't last for very many people. But what is it that turns that switch?
That's a good question, and I think it's different for everybody.
It is, sure it is. So, in your experience, what's the switch? Because that would be really, I think, some value to us, that aren't in psychology necessarily, but understand that activity drives lots of behavior,
sure,
and behavior change, and psychology,
sure,
all those kinds of things. So what are some like switches that you've seen?
So, in my world of patient care, I'm part of a lung transplant team.
Yeah.
And so for patients who have certain diagnoses that potentially could qualify them to even be considered for a transplant, they have to achieve a certain body mass index.
Yeah.
And so right off the board, if their body mass index, BMI, is above such and such, they're not even going to be considered.
Yeah.
And so I've had patients say before that, all right, this is it.
That's
and so
cool.
for maybe the past 20 years, they may have been, 70 pounds overweight, according to, standard charts or whatever, however you want to quantify it. And the switch will go because the motivation there is life and death. It's like, I want a chance to live, and the only way I'm going to potentially get new lungs is if I lose weight. So that's one example.
So Dr. Ornish's book, or not his book, his research, and then there's a book called Change or Die, that references his work. And change only happens 1 out of 10. Right, and so and Dr. Ornish's research suggests also that in lieu of death, fear of death, people change. But then after death is no longer an issue, meaning in your case maybe a lung, but in the book and in the research shows that after a coronary artery bypass graft, right after the threat is gone, they revert back to their old lifestyle.
Right. So
what does that do you see that in the lung transplants?
I would say less for sure.
So what is it about that then? Do you think?
Well, I think part of it, and everybody is different, and this is a very, very narrow group.
You don't have to explain.
People that we're talking about.
We're talking about your experience.
Yeah.
Behavior's behavior.
Right.
So fear is fear.
Right.
So
sure.
Death is death. So
sure.
In your experience, why do
people revert back to? Okay.
Or why aren't people actually?
Yeah.
So why aren't people in your experience reverting back?
I think in the context of patients who have received lungs, the gift of life from somebody who had to give their life.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think impacts the majority of those patients in a way that they realize that it's not just me.
Right.
It's the lungs that I've received.
Right.
And I'm going to do diligence. One of the exercises they're encouraged to do after they get a transplant is to write a letter of gratitude to the family or whomever was associated with the person who gave that gift of life to them. And that's a very powerful thing. And then they're encouraged to keep a copy of that letter as well. Yeah. And so going back, maybe 6 months or a year down the road, if you were to look back at that letter, it can kind of sort of take you back to that nostalgic place of, oh yeah, this is why I'm sticking with these healthy behaviors.
Right.
Now, I don't want to say that every single patient, walks that walk of...
I get that.
But I would say the majority of them really... And they do go through a pretty extensive psychological evaluation to determine their candidacy to undergo this treatment, in the first place. So I think you're dealing with a very select group of people. Now, with that being said, back to the behavior. Why do we revert back to behaviors? And this is a key thing, is that behaviors are a result of deep roots that we have. When we're born into this world, we're domesticated by whomever it is that's raising us, whether it's our parents or our brothers or sisters or the society that we're born into. As a child, you don't make your own decisions. You're not preparing your own food. You're basically giving what you're giving. My husband and I were talking about this the other day, that there's this reward system of, if you eat, you can't leave the table until you finish your food. Here, you have to have more of this. You're only going to get dessert if you eat all that's on your plate. So this idea of dessert for kids, sweets, that's a reward if you eat this, so eat more. Even though maybe as a kid you're saying, well, I don't need that much. Your body is telling you what you need and what you don't need.
There's the new Arita commercial, right? So someone's not eating their broccoli, right? And so they bring out the French fries.
There you go.
Right. So I'll trade you 2 French fries if you eat a bite of your broccoli.
Right. So early on in our lives, I think we are domesticated to have this reward system, or some foods are good, some foods are bad, and we develop these roots and these behavior patterns. And as we get older, I think in times of stress, we go back to that comfort, and what science tells us too is that our behaviors are rooted. There's like 4 generations worth of roots in our behaviors that lead us to be doing or thinking or feeling the way that we feel.
So I'm going to ask you another question.
Is this getting to answer your question though? So
sure, we'll like probably bounce around a bit, right? But
you go back to what you know.
But so I'm going to challenge that a bit, because what it seems to be then, because of the rate at which we're climbing in obesity, diabetes, these kinds of things, is exponential.
Absolutely,
nearly. So this idea that we've been programmed.
Yes.
It seems to me that we're programming worse, if that's true.
Could be.
But I would argue maybe not, though, because now we've got kids that are more at home, outside of their parents. They, the latchkey kid, if you will, back in the day, they're fending for themselves more. Mm-hmm. There's more single parent homes. There's more chances of inactivity. So, I wonder if that plays a role. Not necessarily that's just ingrained in them, because it would mean to me that why are we seeing this exponential increase?
Yeah. Well, once again, and I think it's multifactorial, and I'm no clinical psychologist. I'll say that right off the bat, but I will say that behavior change and valuing yourself, your health, as an adult, when if you're looking at the adult population, overweight adults, and you're talking about, kids' behaviors.
Yeah.
Even though, as people are getting older, that overweightness, obesity, lack of physical activity continues to surface more.
Yeah.
If it comes down to basically self-love, self-worth, valuing yourself. Kids who are raising themselves at home.
Yeah.
Is that healthy? And I'm not a parent, so I'm not gonna.
No, we're not judging that at all. It's just a climate of where we're at. Yeah.
But there's evidence to suggest that early on in life, all of us as humans want to be loved. We want to be accepted. And without feeling love and acceptance from others, I guess at an early age, how do you self-love and how do you value yourself enough to realize that I'm worth it? I'm worth the investment in my health. My health matters. I matter. And that's getting pretty deep, because when it comes to behavior change and a patient gets sent to you and said they need to lose 20 pounds, it's like, right. Well, diagnosis on their referral might be, obesity-related obstructive sleep apnea. Patient needs to lose weight, right. Exercise. It's like, right. Well, there's
nice
got to be something,
right.
How would you feel if you were the patient and that's the referral, that was what was written, and then they come to see you as a therapist? It's like, wait, this didn't just happen overnight.
Right.
Obviously, there's something much deeper, and you need to be sensitive to that and understand, okay, we got to figure out or help this person navigate as to why are they doing what they're doing. And sometimes it's deep, and maybe they do need counseling. And I'm not saying we should be counselors, but...
Right. All right, so I'm going to challenge you.
And I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of commented on it in a roundabout
little
way.
bit. So I'm going to challenge you again, because that's my role.
Okay.
So... from 19...
You're giving back to me about the bike ride, right?
Totally.
I'm off the back.
No, it's
right
not
now.
true. No, I do this to everybody.
I'm off the back.
She's off the back.
That's what we say in the cycling world.
Yeah, she is true.
I got a flat. Hang on.
So,
got a flat.
From 1940 to 1930s up until 1970, the obesity rate was climbing at 1% every decade or something. So it was very low. Between 1970 and 1980 it was flat. It was not changed, and then 1980 it started. That's when you see in all the charts this excessive rise in obesity. So over the years we try to figure out, right, and we can go from fast food restaurant. We can start to pick on fast foods, right? We can start to pick on high fructose corn syrup. We can start to pick on women in the workforce. We can start to pick on automation. So there's, a dozen or 100 different reasons why people have picked whether this happens or not. So you can track all that. You can go online and you can find out the number of sales of hamburgers in McDonald's. You can find the rate at which fast food restaurants increase. You can look at how many cans of soda people buy, how much sugar is sold, right? So you can. It's relative. The data is out there if you want to find it. What was interesting to me, none of those matched that curve. None of them. And so, because it was just always this, nice little steady rise in things. A high fructose corn syrup, that was well after the spike in obesity starting in 1980. So, the only thing to me that stuck out. So in 1970, video game sales was about 130,000. Units or $130,000 in sales in 1970. In 1980, it was maybe $40 million. So it was $90 million in 1980. I wonder if it's more about activity.
Yeah.
Because that's the only thing. Not only, it's one of the main profound indicators of activity.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big fan of activity. You are. We're PT. Physical therapy means, the first word in our profession is physical. Right. I like that about it.
Right.
And you're right. We're not psychologists.
Right.
Although we should understand behavior.
Right.
In order to link that with, something that would improve health for a patient if they want
to.
So talk to us about activity.
Yeah. So that's a really good observation that you made about the association between video games and obesity. I guess one other variable I'd like to throw in there is sleep and lack of sleep.
So that is there. So I'll
you know the statistics on that?
I do.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I do. So in the 50s and 60s, there was about 9 hours of sleep per a day. For that was on average, and now it's 6.5. So there was no relative spike in loss of sleep. So it occurred.
What's the demographic though of that data? Is it so the people who are buying the video games? Let's just say that the demographic of that age group is what, teenage? 12 to 16, 18, during that time
During
period?
that time, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So are they included in the demographic data for sleep? Or
yes.
is the census, like who's being surveyed to come up with those statistics?
That would be the average. It would be the average data.
Right, so if the group that's video gaming, the gamers, are not included in that demographic, and they're the ones then that have become obese, it would be very difficult to tease that out, because
I don't know I don't know that I'm linking I'm linking activity.
Okay.
Or I would argue inactivity.
So inactivity is one variable
versus sleep.
But lack of sleep,
because sleep doesn't have any significant rise or decrease. It's actually maybe
it's from 8 hours to 6.5 hours.
Yeah, but that's over 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
Right.
So 7 to 9 hours, I think, is what's recommended. Yeah, and more in kids.
I think it's 6.5. I think maybe now or close between 6.5 and 7. Right now is the average. So it's on the low side.
Okay. So, well, I guess the point that I was trying to make is that if people are not getting adequate sleep on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And let's say if they're gaming through the night.
Yeah.
Let's
pick inactivity.
Okay. But that can impact. So inactivity. So that's a confounding variable. Yeah. So even if you're active and you're not getting adequate sleep, that can set you up for weight gain. So I just wanted to emphasize the importance of the holistic idea of health, stress also. But just being sedentary, I think for sure is contributing to overweightness. Now I think what studies will show is that if you're trying to lose weight or manage your weight, your nutrition and your approach to your nutrition, I hate to use the word diet.
It's the amount that we eat. So we can say that it's nutrition, but it's calories.
I think there's more to it than just calories.
Yeah, but of course there is. It's
because you can have what I call
the high density
fat people. You can have people who are like of a normal body weight and BMI.
Yeah.
But if you actually look at their percent body fat
or lean mass,
they would be very unhealthy because maybe all they do is eat sugar, and they're thin. So on the outside, it's like, they look like they're healthy, but really.
But that's not the majority.
Right. So
the majority are.
So I think activity for sure plays into the equation. I think when people are sitting for long periods of time, if you want to get into the whole breathing physiology behind it, I think people tend to underbreathe. And they breathe very shallowly, and it slows their breathing rate, and that changes your respiratory physiology. It changes your metabolism, and I think sets you up for weight gain.
Yeah.
And so
talk us a little bit about some geeky stuff.
Geeky stuff?
Well, that's yeah.
Well, there was a book that just go ahead.
Yeah. So no, just exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I recently read a book by James Nestor. It's called Breath. And I think it was published it's a New York Times bestseller. I think it was published in 2020, maybe.
Yeah. It's still on the list, by the way.
And it really opened up my eyes. And I'm a breathing specialist. I mean, I'm a pulmonary physical therapist. I have 25 years of experience working with a lot of the patients who were survivors of COVID-19 that were referred to me that still had some respiratory symptoms. It became evident to me that their breathing patterns, a lot of them, were very shallow and rapid, and there really wasn't a reason. Now, granted, I did not know these people before, so seeing them afterwards, I started to notice this repetitiveness in their breathing patterns that were very shallow. And I won't get into all of the other things that I saw, but I read this book. I started to think more about breathing exercises and how important it is to retrain people how to breathe, because we might not be breathing properly, and that could be contributing to, our overall physiology and metabolism and healing and health and so forth, relaxation, stress, heart rates, blood pressures. And so just based on empirical evidence, my experience is that, and I did this with myself first. I was experimenting on myself if I can, to retrain myself how to breathe. And in this book, they talk about different types of breathing strategies too. And breathing through your nose is one of the things that this author really promotes. And it's things that yoga specialists...
Oh, good, because I'm a nose breather.
No,
I am.
No, because breathing, most of the time, your nose is like your natural, it's like your defense, We've got, it's intended to filter the air. Exactly. Right. It's kind of like the air filter of your vehicle, It's like people change their air filters on their cars, but you're going to breathe with your mouth wide open without, are you going to not have an air filter in your car and drive down a dusty road? No, I mean, that would be stupid. I might ruin my car.
Well, they do in racing.
Let more air in. But then you can always just fix it, But one of the premises of this book is that we really need to look at how we're breathing and to maximize our respiratory physiology. And breathing through your nose is one of the strategies that's been shown to strengthen and increase the tone of some of the muscles in the back of your throat to help to maintain airway patency. It helps you to breathe deeper. It helps with relaxation. It helps with filtering the air, warming the air, humidifying the air, things of that nature.
So I get that there's, let's pick 900 things that influence health.
Yes.
Okay, right. So.
Well, this author talks about breathing being the number one thing. So.
All right, so we're going to say poo-poo on that.
Okay.
I'll say it right out, right? Because that's not true, right? It's not the way that people breathe. It's why they get fat. It's not. And so...
Well, if people underventilate,
but that's not the primary reason people are obese, is because they don't breathe through their nose.
But if your CO2 levels... If you really think about...
I get there's physiology related to that. I get that is 100% true. But I would argue that that's not the main reason. So, what do you think is the main reason?
And I think it's multifactorial.
I just told you. Stop it. I just listed 900. You can't say breathing, and then I'm going to go after you. So I just listed 900. Right, so I get it.
Inactivity?
It is really multifactorial, without question, and I'm not disregarding that in any way. That all the things that we listed about obesity rates and things like that do contribute. Epigenetics. I think the food that we eat, the kinds of food, the processed food, how we started with GMOs and pesticides and all those things, I do think that that contributes to some of the unhealthiness in our society for sure. But what's the biggest bang for our buck? Maybe it's not just one, right? So maybe it's 2 or 3 that we could take home, as PTs, as clinicians, as people that want to take charge of their community. What's a couple of just, maybe it's 3 or 4. You pick the number. What are the main drivers to try to improve health in the community?
Are you saying the factors that influence a person's health, or what can physical therapy? Okay.
Yeah.
So the factors I think that can influence a person's health, tangible things
Greatest
that people
factors,
can do. Okay. Healthy nutrition.
Okay.
Movement throughout the day.
Okay.
So physical activity. It doesn't have to be just a half an hour every day. In
Right.
fact, sitting at your desk all day and then doing a half hour at the end of the day or in the beginning of the day
probably not healthy.
it's probably more healthy to get up and move throughout the day. So movement, physical activity in general.
Yeah.
And there are recommendations of how much to get. Sleep. I can't emphasize that enough. I think getting enough, the quality and quantity of your sleep, and making sure that your room is a place of peace and solitude without your cell phone, without lights, and there's a whole, that in and of itself is a whole study, and we can talk about that for hours too. Stress management, managing your stress, I think is key, and then your socialization, engaging with others, and having a tribe that you feel like you belong to, that loves you and that you love them. Yeah, and then having a purpose.
So let's talk about that last one. Often, students will say, I want to work with the patient more. Yeah. Right. I don't want to be a doctor or a physician or a PA or something because they only see him for 10 minutes and then they leave. I have my own thoughts about that.
He said it, I didn't. Maybe 15 minutes.
Maybe 15. Maybe 20. It doesn't really matter. They've never been in primary care where, the patient actually absolutely loves all that. So the meaning for that physician is probably stronger than a PT. Anyway, so now I don't remember where I was going. Where was I going?
You were talking about students wanting to spend more time with people.
Oh, socialization. Right. So Dan gives up. Dr. King, Dan King.
Been on the podcast.
Been on the podcast. Everyone else, Dan. He'll give the cell phone number to patients and text me how you're doing tonight. And they do. And he's got these. I don't know how busy he is on connecting with patients, and he gets immediate buy-in with patients because they know right away that he not just cares for them, but will follow through and keep connecting with them. And so, and I love to learn. I like to read a lot, and I do read a lot, and that to me has been fascinating to just be, on the outside looking in and seeing the importance. We all talk about this biopsychosocial model, and I wonder about really creating change. We started this new branding with the clinic, and it's, do you know the new name?
You told me, but
Motif,
I can't. Yes,
right?
that's
so where movement and life come together, and I want to know how to do that better, so that way we can see the behavior change that we need to in communities, because I think there's a strong link. You ranked at number 5, so I think there's a strong link to that. And so
I don't know if that's number 5. I mean
1, 2, 3. No, I'm just you know what I mean. It's in the top for you,
right?
And so talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I think in order to help people with behavior change, you need to show up. If they showed up, you need to show up. Yeah. You need to engage. Yeah. And you need to walk the walk with them. Now there are, I would argue that there are some boundaries that we need to set as individuals, and I think that needs to be determined as an individual. Some institutions would not allow that, and that would be grounds for dismissal. Yeah. Emailing, though, using the account from the institution would be a
way to do that.
Correct. Yeah. But developing what's called an accountability plan with your patient, and having them actually develop that accountability plan. So after the patient has helped, they've gotten buy-in for what the plan is.
Yeah.
And that would be, we can, do a whole other podcast on how do you arrive at that. But let's just say you've arrived at, the patient has helped to determine what the best plan of management is and what the next steps are. So what are your next steps? And then how can I help you stick to this plan?
Yeah.
And so then the patient can say, it would be helpful if I could, talk to you in a week, or it would be helpful if I could call you tomorrow, or it'd be helpful if you called. And if the patient can't come up with it, maybe you could come up with some options. And maybe Dan's option or Dr. Kang's option is, why don't you text me tonight and tell me how you're doing?
Yeah, and he has lots of options. Not that that's his only one, but he gets them to communicate effectively the way that they can stay connected. And so, like you said, he wants to be accountable to them, and he's making himself available for. It doesn't matter when. He's making himself available for that person to change.
Right. And I think that's key. That shows that you care, but then also helping to develop self-efficacy in your patients. So at some point in time, the patient needs to feel comfortable and confident enough to be able to do that on their own. So you need to be careful not to develop a codependent relationship with that patient either by being too close to them. So. And that comes with experience. You have to, and everybody's got different personalities, and but definitely I think showing up and walking the walk with the patient.
I've always believed that. So model behavior. And let that person know that you're doing that as well.
Right. Yeah. Right. One of the things I talk to students about is like as we're educating our patients or as we're working with them, instead of the traditional do this, tell them,
Right. Yeah, we don't do that anymore either.
But ask, listen, and inspire. So ask questions, listen to what the patient says, and then inspire patient accountability, and self-efficacy and self-confidence in developing these behaviors. So
yeah, that's cool.
But if the patient helps, if it really is a behavior change, if the patient helps to determine the steps that they're going to take, what's reasonable for them, and it might be, I can walk my dog for 10 minutes once a week. And that's what I'm willing to give right now. Then you know what? You take that.
You do.
And then the next week, maybe it's like, well,
you text
hypothetically,
them, how'd the walk go?
Exactly. Right? And so that they're made to feel like it's a judgment-free zone, and that's good because something is better than nothing. So when it comes to behavior change.
No, I'm with you. We talked a little bit about this, a couple of days ago. When you look at the activities guideline that was, published, any amount of physical activity majorly changes your all-cause mortality.
Right. Yeah. And it changes your mindset. I think one could argue once you get up and you start moving, you start to feel better.
Movement. Leads emotion.
It does.
Emotion follows movement.
I believe that.
And so Dr. Andrew Huberman from Stanford's got a ton of research on that. We're big believers in that. Just try as hard as you can to get them to move. Because that automatically changes their mood. And we don't have to be psychologists.
Right.
We can be, experts in movement, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, their self-efficacy goes up. Right. And we didn't have to talk about self-efficacy.
Right.
So, I like that link. I'd never thought of that before because, we often think of the biopsychosocial model. All right, let's pick diabetes. That's bio, right? We're talking about chronic health condition. We think about self-efficacy as the social, the psych piece. And then the social piece would be, family and, connections with therapists and, community and things like that. I really liked the way that you said that that social interaction helps develop self-efficacy. So which is really interesting. So now we've got movement, motion, activity helps with self-efficacy. Now you've got this other link with, social not being socially isolated, some, being connected.
Right.
Also, helps with self-efficacy. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Well, I will say that over the past year with social distancing being just, now it's a common term, social distance. Right. And as soon as I started thinking about this, and I've heard other people say this too, we should really be using the terminology physically distance, because social distancing has led to social isolation in many groups, primarily in the elderly.
Yep, it has.
And I have seen the aftermath of this, and I think that we're going to see more of it. And as physical therapists, no matter what area you're working in, if it may not be chronic disease management, but you could be seeing a patient that's undergone an elective procedure that was on hold from before, that hasn't seen another human being or interacted with another human being for 6 months. Right. And they're afraid.
Yep.
Whereas we in the health profession and in this program figured out a way to continue to be in person throughout the pandemic.
We did.
And as difficult maybe or challenging as that was, I don't think we realized it in real time, the benefits of doing that and what other people were really going through. But now we're going to see, I think, a lot of the psychological impact and the social isolation that occurred and the impact on people's health.
We had...
you can't not take it into consideration.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, sorry to interrupt, but... So this is Health and Wellness Week. That's why Kim's here. And so she has been helping with kind of this. And we have exercise tonight. So where I'm going with this is we had back care last night and nutrition the night before and a couple of comments from those that were here. It was finally a place I could go that was in person. There's a large organization close by that's doing all of their classes, whether it be back or nutrition or diabetes or osteoarthritis. All of them are on Zoom or some sort of pre-recorded watching via video. So it was striking. Yeah. What they said was we're tired of being not in person.
Yeah.
So you're right. I think that. We're going to see the aftermath here in a bit, just because of how long people have been sequestered away from family, from relationships, from healthcare, and being social. Yeah. Cool. How we doing?
Great. It's a good time. Actually, we're almost at an hour exactly. Okay. On the dot.
Okay.
That was great.
I was going to say just one more thing that I forgot earlier. We have to remember that when we're seeing people who have chronic disease, oftentimes the diagnosis they're sent to us with is a symptom. We think about treating diabetes. Yeah. And oftentimes we talk about, well, you have to lose weight,
Oh, right.
And I recently went to heard someone speak on diabetes, and she's a professor at a university in the Midwest, and then she also has her own private practice, and it was very interesting. She said that her proposal is that we should use a weight-neutral approach when it comes to diabetes, because being overweight doesn't cause diabetes. There's an association between overweightness and diabetes. Right. And to tell people that they should lose weight is telling weight loss is not a behavior, is the way she said it. And I was like, wow, and I work with a lot of people that have diabetes. So just hearing it that way made me think of it a little bit differently. And then another term she used was use a weight-neutral approach. So you're talking about behavior changes that will likely maybe result in weight loss, but it's the behavior change that gets to that point, so that we're not stigmatizing people as being overweight and that's the cause of their diabetes, because then people internalize that and they start to feel bad about themselves. And so there's a whole psychology behind what terms you use and how you approach it. So that was just an example of a symptom.
Think about movement.
If we think about movement.
And we think about nutrition.
We think about
sleep. Stress. There we go.
And socialization.
And being social.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. It's not. It's like you said. It's. I think, and we're guilty. Compartmentalizing. That it's diabetes, and that's because of you're overweight, or you're unhealthy because you're overweight, or your high blood pressure is because you're overweight. Right. But trying to think of other ways to talk to them about behavior change. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Hauk's going to like this podcast because we're talking about behavior change. So maybe he'll listen to it. Maybe not.
I'm all about it too. Behavior change is like, if you're not changing your patients' lives and you're just getting the scale to move, like what's the point? You want them to enjoy life. Right. Where movement and life come together. We want life to be
both.
A big result of that.
Yeah, we do, for sure.
So, I'm driving with everything you're saying. This is great.
And if you start defining yourself by a number on the scale or body mass index, those aren't metrics to define a person. That's one entity or a characteristic, and you just really need to look at the whole person. And it goes back to what we talked about in the beginning. It's like meeting a person where they're at, and trying to establish that relationship and walking the walk with them, so that they know, hey, you're going to show up, I'm here too. Let's do it together.
Anytime you want.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, not anytime you want, but
then we go.
Well, you can if you want.
And there's boundaries. You know what I mean.
I mean, if you don't have a life outside of work, that's cool, but I like to ride my bike, so I'm not going to be answering texts when I'm on my bike.
But you could ride with them. There we go.
Hey, I have done that.
Have you really?
Yes. I had a patient that actually post-COVID, a patient who recovered of COVID, and he was put on supplemental oxygen and wasn't sure that he could ride his bike again. And we got him back on his bike.
That's awesome.
And he's like happy as a clam and using his supplemental oxygen, and it's awesome.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Kim, I have a question for you. You think it's too late to reverse where we are as a country?
No.
In terms of health?
As far as reverse, I don't think we need to reverse. I think that we can certainly make an impact. I think people are ready for change, especially now coming out after Corona. At least, I know in some parts of the country it didn't exist, but like where I'm from, like it existed, and people are outside now. What's been interesting is the bike industry, and that's what I'm most familiar with. You cannot are you guys familiar with so when people, couldn't go to gyms and stuff, and people were stuck at home, I think husbands and wives and couples and families were at each other, who are you, And we've had several of our friends get divorced. You either grew together or you grew apart. But I think being inside, people started realizing the only way I can get physical activity is if I get outside. So we saw a lot more people walking their dogs. And then in the bike industry, you cannot get a bike. Bikes are it takes a year now. They're back ordered because production slowed a little bit.
Right.
But everybody wanted to get out on their bikes. Right. And so across the country, if you want to sell a bike right now, I mean, you could get 10 times the amount. It's like the housing market right now. But hearing that says to me that people want to get outside. People need movement because being stuck inside their house and their routine and working from home and not being around other people force them to turn to something else.
Yeah.
And I know that there's probably equal statistics. Alcohol sales have gone up exponentially. Suicide rates have gone up, But the fact that there is a group of people that have been outside now, that's promising to me.
Yeah.
And to see more people and more families. I see more families out walking their dog and walking, with their kids and stuff. Whereas before, that was not a norm in the community that I was from. And so I definitely think that there's potential for change. And how we, you asked a question before, and that's why I asked for clarification. You asked something about how physical therapists can help people towards behavior change. One of the best things I think we can do is do the do.
Yeah. I'm with you. I've always been that kind of person.
Yep.
That's model behavior.
Yep. Because then people are like, I want what he has.
You better be starting these programs in your community, you
right.
Because that's what's the problem with the community.
Right. It's like so reaching
model
out.
The behavior, yes.
And not putting ourselves above our patients.
Right.
Because I think so much in medicine, and that's really hard for me to see is, telling your patient, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to take a pill. And people believe if I get diabetes, if I get the sugar diabetes, I'll just go to my doctor and get the medicine, and it's like, yeah. So I think if we got to start with kids, and I think it takes, like with any behavior, 4 generations, it's ingrained. So, it's about epigenetics.
I think there's a chance of reversing that with epigenetics. I do.
Letting people know that they have more control over their health and their well-being than they know. That cancer isn't sitting there waiting to jump out, or cardiovascular disease isn't sitting behind a tree waiting to jump out, to get you.
No.
But it is if your behaviors are bad.
Even the guy on the treadmill.
Well, maybe it was for him.
Wow. Great topic today. Great conversation today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. And just make sure you're connecting with us in some way, whether it would be, liking or subscribing. You can connect with us directly, and be sure to visit our website, motifcenter.com. And if you want to be featured in our Q&A, send us a question. We'd be happy to answer that in our Q&A session, and let us know where you're coming from.